All right. Fantastic. It's on the dot now, Anita. So thank you very much for joining us. I just want to kick off this session. I know some of us are participants are joining as we speak. So I want to welcome all for joining this webinar. It's called The Future of Work Enabling Teams to Thrive. And I want to take this opportunity to introduce you to a good colleague of mine, Anita Guha. I had the privilege of working with her sitting next to each other for 3 years in India, Bangalore, because I was on on um, on a client engagement. I was sent to India, and I had an opportunity to work with Anita and some amazing leaders. One of them is Julian, Karups. They're wonderful people I work with. And just to talk a little bit of Anita, she is a Harvard graduate, and she's a daughter of a very famous ambassador of India. And she has a plethora of knowledge, rich plethora of knowledge when it comes to training leaders, helping organizations to grow, bringing agility to the HR departments, and also looking at what are the ways we can uplift the graduates, the individuals, the teams, and even the entire business units, the business units of leaders. What I also learned about Anita, her emphasis on leadership, because as leaders, you might be having 10 people or 300 people or even 3,000 people. Directly, you might impact those 3,000 people you manage. But what about the people behind? For example, the families. So you do play a very important role when you're working with leadership and working with your teams and individuals. So on that note, yes, I have learned a lot working with Anita. And it's a privilege to bring her and introduce her because we'll be learning a lot from her as well, from a rich experience. So a little bit about a leadership tribe. Leadership tribe is a global training and consulting organizations where we have offices in UK, India, US, and few other places globally. And we have consultants who work with us as well. One of the key goals of our organization is to, whatever we are learning and delivering for organizations, we want to bring it back to the community. We call it as a tribe of like-minded people growing, learning. On this evening, honestly, you don't need to even take your 1 hour, 45 minutes, and you can spend some time with your loved family members or your work. But it's your self-interest which you have taken. So we want to make sure we give you the right content at the right time and bring you the right people who have done the job for you. So you can listen from those amazing personalities, and Anita is one of them. So we will be sharing the wisdom of the tribe and how do we make learning stick. That's what we specialize in. If you're interested to learn more, drop us a note to hello@Leadership Tribe, and we'll be more than happy. And we believe in building high-performance organizations and team. It's not only IT, but most of our work is from non-IT organizations as well. So if you're looking at how do you bring agility for IT and non-IT organizations, drop us a note and we'll be more than happy. So on that note, in the chat window, can you just type yes or no, just to understand that you have understood all the basic information. Jason, that's a yes. Okay, we got few yeses from all coming in the chat window. And I would recommend you, if you're asking a question, you can send a question to panelists and attendees. So in that way, you will be able to see all the messages coming from various people. Because if you're sending it to panelists only me or Anita will be able to see that. So if you're sending it to panelists and attendees, you'll be able to see all the messages. Yes, that's a quick test what we are doing. So it looks good. We can all hear. So on that note, I want to hand over to my lovely colleague, Anita. Anita, over to you, ma'am.
Okay, great. I've also got a slide here on Zoom, just in terms of using this medium. And you've already mentioned about the panelists and attendees. You're all aware that this session is going to be recorded. And with regard to, while we are going to set aside some time at the end for Q&A, I'm encouraging you to raise your questions as you think of them. So, I would suggest just typing them out in the text chat, And we'll also have time for you to, if you can speak up, or I'll repeat the questions. And I've got colleague Aarti here to call me out and interrupt me at any point if there's a question that's really relevant for that moment, because I don't necessarily want to only look at questions at the end. Okay, thank you so much, Krishna. It's really great to have you introduce me. I think I've done some intros of you in the past at IBM, but now it's nice to see the roles reversed. And looking forward to reconnecting again on a more regular basis. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today is learning and the future of work, enabling teams to thrive. And when we talk about learning here, I'm really using learning in a very broad definition sense of learning. So, when I think about learning, it's really looking across the area of looking at learning in terms of education, facilitation. Coaching is also part of learning. Any kind of development work that you're involved in doing is really, you can look at learning in that broader sense, and therefore looking at talent management and how do you help talent develop and manage. So I'm really going on the assumption that all of you here listening to this session, whether it's to the live session right now or to the recording later, have some association with this broad definition of learning. And what we're going to look at today is looking at that in light of this context of the future of work, and then seeing how can we combine these two and how can we thrive and how can we start building our own tools to work well in this space. Okay, so that's where we're going to start. So what we're going to cover today is really 4 key topics. So we're going to start with learning design and development and just look at some key components around the design of learning. And that's really thinking about beginning with the end in mind. So when you plan a learning intervention, any kind of a talent interventions in the organizations that you support or in the teams that you're trying to develop, you have some kind of a goal in mind. And part of that goal means you're designing something before you actually execute it. So we're going to look a little bit at what are some key components of that design and development before you get to, executing on it. So we'll start with that. We'll then look at what is the future of work? And I'm looking at many of you coming out with your ideas for it, because I'm looking for a lot of inputs as well. I'm going to be learning through this session, hopefully too. And then we'll look at the connection between the two, the impact of future of work with this broader definition of learning. And finally, we'll emerge with some actions you can take. Because frankly, we're all doing these webinars and listening to many Zoom calls and various things, and there's a lot of knowledge going in, but ultimately to make that knowledge effective, each of us needs to figure out what action am I going to take to implement something new that I've learned. Because otherwise it's like you're collecting all this new gyan, all this new information, and if you're not trying to apply at least one aspect of it, then it goes in one year and unfortunately comes out the other. And we forget stuff, and then we don't execute on it, and then it kind of is a wasted investment in time. So throughout the session, I invite you to think about, as I'm sharing stuff, think about how can I apply this stuff? What can I do differently? What can I change in the way that I'm doing currently? And that's a suggestion, frankly, not only for my session, but all the different sessions that you're attending and making time to attend. Try to personalize them. Try to see how does it apply to you? What is the difference you are going to do to make a change? Because that's going to be what will make your learning effective and make it more impactful in terms of translating that into action. So we look at some actions I propose, but really throughout the session, I'm inviting you to keep thinking about that. Okay. And a reminder again, that if you have questions along the way, please just post them in text chat. I have asked my colleague Aarti and Ashik to just interrupt me if they need to at any point to say, hey, there's a question here, maybe you could take it right now. I have no problem with doing that. If I'm planning to cover something along those lines, I'll tell them that. But otherwise, I'm happy to be interrupted because frankly, I prefer dialogue. I want to hear some of you talk. I want to hear some of your voices, or at least see some of your inputs through the text chat, so that, you know, there's a little bit of togetherness through this. Okay, so let's start now with learning design. And here I'm really first trying to paint a picture of what are some components to think about in terms of when you're designing something where you're trying to bring in a learning intervention of some sort, or some kind of a organizational change, or some kind of a talent management or talent intervention that you're trying to implement. What are some components to think about? Okay, and so I'm just going to share a couple of slides to, and these are just a few bullet points that I've picked up over time in my own experience, in addition to now being the talent advisor for the CIO organization in IBM. I have been also in the learning organization of HR learning of IBM, and in the course of that have also played a role in the global design team, which is the team at IBM that does the instructional designs for a lot of the internal training programs. So some of this is material picked up through my experience in those areas of work, okay, which I'm sharing with you. Okay, so let's look at some components of learning design and development. Let's start with learning is social. I think that goes without saying in a way, but here in these fora, we are also seeing how when you think about designing learning, and for each of these bullets that I'm going to share with you, it's what I'd like you to do is reflect on any learning that you are delivering, whether as an agile coach, or whether as a facilitator, or whether you know, there's something where you are getting a team together and even running a meeting where you're trying to educate them on some particular point. To what extent are you encouraging that social element? And for each of these bullets, you can consider that. Ask those questions, because the social aspect helps learning to thrive. So it helps it helps to, when people have that interaction component, it helps a lot. Okay. Second point, learning is experiential. Now, at its most extreme, I think we've all had experiences in our lives through which we've learned, and experience is an important teacher for each of us. On the bottom right here, you can see a Kolb's cycle of experiential learning, which you could say represents some of the experiences in our lives. But by looking at this cycle, we can also design learning to create mini experiences from which we derive learning. And you do that by creating a situation, a scenario which you have participants experience, then reflecting on that scenario, from that reflection coming up with some kind of an abstract theory around the scenario, and then keeping that theory in mind, applying it in a certain way. And then that cycle can continue with an upward spiral of, you know, learning, trying something new, seeing how that, you know, reflecting on that, seeing how its impact, and so on and so forth. And in a way, all our experience works that way. Sometimes we don't do enough reflection, to be honest. So we end up going in a circle that kind of stays in the same place, or unfortunately, sometimes goes downward as well. But if we do have that step of reflecting on what was our experience, that helps us rise above it the next time, make changes, and then rise higher and do better in the future. So learning is experiential as well. Another aspect of learning is the neuroscience component of learning. And this has become more and more popular and you know, more and more researched in the recent few years, where there's a greater recognition of the fact that learning actually has an impact on the way our brain operates. You know, there are certain aspects about how the plasticity of the brain, and in terms of absorbing new knowledge, there's a physical change that happens, not just you know, something in our imagination. So some elements of that are around, you know, how do you incorporate some form of repetition in learning so that you reinforce key points, So when you're introducing some new data, it's a good idea to introduce it in one way, but also in another way. So that's part of that, how do you reinforce to retain learning? Also the idea that if you don't use it, you lose it. So active learning is important. And this is where, my emphasis on thinking about actions, about how you're going to apply the learning also is important. That just learning theory doesn't stick as well as if you incorporate some practical element where you get to apply it. Okay. Okay, there are a lot of different theories on the process of learning. So you have the process of discovery, exploration, immersion, and adoption. That's just one theory, the kind of a cycle of you first discover something new, you explore it in more depth, you immerse yourself in it, and then you adopt it. And that can be like a whole cycle of, you can think about learning new languages, how you learn, you go through this process before you adopt a new language. You kind of need that process. And certain things are more work well with this kind of process. You have another process, which is observe, imitate, model. And that can be a form of learning where, you can use simulations, you can observe others, experts doing a certain thing and model, follow them and then model it yourself, So there are a host of different theories, but I wanted you to also be familiar with, doing a little bit of understanding of what are these theories, because that helps us to design learning better as well. There's a 70-20-10 model, which some of you may be familiar with. The diagram here also talks about 70% learning through doing, 20% learning through others. So that's the relationship aspect and the social aspect of learning. And 10% is learning through courses. So it's also reminding us that we can't put all learning into this box of a training course. You really need those a much greater emphasis on the 70% of experiential learning, of actually applying it, okay? And EEE, the triple E model of experience, exposure, and education is in a way similar to the 70-20-10 model, said in different ways, where you've got experience, the experience of a new job can teach you a lot more than just education about what that job is going to be. Exposure to a job could be like through a job shadowing or a mentoring, can be, again, a powerful way versus just learning about it in a training program. So these are just some components of learning design. Okay, I'm going to continue with, when we think about learning design, another key thing to think about is the motivation to learn. So when you go into any kind of intervention that you're planning with a community of people, you need to think about, why are people motivated to do this? Why do people want to stick with it? And there are three key points that I'm highlighting here. One is about thinking about what's in it for me. And the what's in it for me, the me in that what's in it is, could be the sponsor, because sometimes you have a sponsor who is requesting a particular learning intervention, but it could also be the learner. And ideally, they're both aligned. You do sometimes get requests for learning where the sponsors and the learners' requirements are not aligned, and it's important to reconcile those before you start designing the learning, because if they're not aligned, there could be some major dissonance. But thinking about this issue of the what's in it for me is important, again, as part of the beginning with the end in mind. The carrot and stick of learning is another key thing to think about, is how do you, once you get people into learning, how do you keep them there? How do you keep them engaged in the learning? And there are a number of techniques to do that, carrot and stick. So you can keep them engaged by giving them carrots, like a gamification, like a fun game that makes people stay, or a promise of mastery that makes people, want to get their badges and certificates to kind of give them awards, and entry and exit barriers to learning. So, some of these same elements can be sticks of learning, in the sense that if they're positioned as, if you don't get this badge, you will not be eligible for a promotion. Or if you don't get this mastery, then the door will be blocked for you to go further from here. So the same thing, which is an incentive, can also be positioned as a stick. If you don't, then threat of, whatever the threat that is meaningful to the learner. Ideally, one wants to use more carrots than sticks, but one needs to be aware that both are important elements to think about in designing any kind of intervention with adult learners. And then we also, of course, have to think about learning measurement, in the sense that whatever learning, if we are investing time in learning, we need to think about how are we measuring the success? Does it work? Is it of value? Is it efficient? And what are the ways in which we are going to measure that? My final slide on components and kind of, what are some key design components of learning design and development is that learners have preferences and styles. And, if you search, you'll find there are multiple different preferences. So I've shared some screenshots from multiple different sources, but the one that I'd like to really focus on is the one on the left side: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So those are, there are learners that are more visual oriented, and you need to be able to share pictures to visualize or, how to help the learner. You have more auditory learners who are more comfortable with hearing and repeating on a hearing basis. And then you've got kinesthetic learners who are more hands-on learners, more active, and they want to do an activity. Now, one can say, okay, I don't know my learning group and I don't know what to try. So the ideal there is, because we don't always have the ability, we seldom have the ability of testing who our audience is in terms of visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. But a good learning design will ensure that there are reasonably good components of each of these elements. So it's not too much of just a podcast without visual aids. It's not too much of just all pictures and imagination, but without kind of explaining the stuff. It's not too much of, activities without the kind of translating what those activities mean and articulating it and explaining it. So you want to make sure that a combination of these, and you can see, it's in more detail, some other models that show it even further, but some of this combination incorporated into your learning design. So that's where I wanted to just go with, just giving you a little bit of a broad sweep of things that you need to think about when you are designing any kind of a learning intervention. And here learning is defined in that broadest sense of any kind of organizational change intervention that you're thinking about. Okay, so now let's keep that aside and look at this topic of and here I've got all of them listed here, and you can use this in a way as a kind of a checklist even. It's quite useful to just say the next time you're planning an intervention to just take this list and say, okay, I mean, you can't always have every single item on your covered on the checklist, but if you kind of touch on some of these and bulk of these, I think your learning design is likely to be much more robust and therefore be much more sticky. And we do all want sticky learning when we are investing the time and effort to educate. So this is the checklist you can keep in mind. Now let's move to the context that we are talking about, which is the context of the future of work. And I think some of you would have heard of that expression, the future of work is now. What does that actually mean to you, I wonder? And so here I'm going to invite you to first just share with me, when I say something like the future of work is now, what is the feeling that you get from that expression? What feeling bubbles up immediately? So just get in touch with your emotion. And if you can use the text chart right now, and again, yes, you can use panelists and attendees so that other attendees can also see what you're posting. What is the feeling? Okay, I can see Jason has responded immediately saying, we're doing something new. Okay, so I think that's a great input, but and I can see Alex has added, don't put things off. but I'm trying to get a little deeper to emotion. What's your immediate emotion when you think the future, or the future of work is now? What emotion comes to your mind? Anxiety, excitement. Okay, now you're getting it. Jason, excitement. Karthik, anxiety. Vani says the current Zoom meeting we have now for this session, and it's going to be norm. Okay, that's part of the future. Okay, so you're again on, because I think we wear our mental hats, and I'm trying to get more into the emotional aspect. But curious, okay, great, Karthik, you're on. So I know it's sometimes difficult because left brain and right brain, they're all working together. Successful collaboration via remote connection comes to mind. Okay, Rajeshwari, I can see that. Let's hear a few more. Emotion, like really try and get to your emotion. What's your immediate emotional feeling? So, because I'm seeing some emotional responses, definitely excitement, anxiety, and curiosity, enthusiasm as well. Okay. Great. Wait, I've got some pictures here to help maybe just make you think about what are some thoughts. Any more that you'd like to add? Just if the pictures help trigger some thoughts of what does it make you think? Indecisive. Okay, there's indecisive. You looked at this way, that way, and yes, there's that uncertainty, the unknown factor. Karthik, absolutely. Rajeshwari as well. So there's, on the one hand, there's some enthusiasm, but there's also a little bit of indecisive, and which way do I go? I'm so uncertain. I'm not sure. There's a little anxiety. There's, you can see the scream here of, more than just mere anxiety, but kind of a little tense. There's also curiosity. Yes, like I wonder what's out there, right? You're looking out into the distance, what's there? There's confusion. That's a great point, Suman. So there's also confusion, not represented in my pictures. I need to add another graphic for confusion, but yes, there's confusion about what to do next. The world is getting used to collaborate, form, space, and Mars. I didn't quite get that point, Adarsh. The world is getting used to collaborate from space and Mars. Is it from, not from? But okay. Okay, so I'm getting a sense of the context of the future of work. Okay, so now my question to you is, we've looked at the context in terms of how you feel about it. So now I'm going to ask you a little more about, instead of the how question, how do I feel, to think about the what question. When you think future of work, and I think some of you jump to the what question to start with, because I think our natural tendency is to be more left-brained and think analytically. So now let's go to more into some of your comfort zone. What is some of the what of the future of work? What are some of the components of the future of work? Okay, so I'm seeing Vishwas's response, open to global opportunities, working remotely. So you're seeing working remotely is part of the future of work because more global opportunities are open to us. The world is getting used to collaborate. Maybe that collaboration point is a little more about the what. What else? What else would you describe as components of the future of work? So again, use the text chat to respond. Embracing changes, okay, new tools. So Jason has added new tools. Can maybe if you could elaborate a little more, time zone is no more a blocker. That's part of the future of work. So Rajeshwari, go back a little. Why is time zone no longer a blocker? Like what is happening that makes time zone no longer a blocker? Ability to work as per customer time zone. Okay, so that whole flexibility that you have to work according to the customer time zone, fine, that comes up. Working remote, so a lot of you are bringing up the remote work as one key aspect of the future of work, and that's definitely there. What else? We need more things that people can interact together through a Zoom rather than one person sharing a screen, says Jason. So kind of rather than one person sharing a screen, that's kind of one with many. You want more collaborative tools. I wonder if some of you are familiar with Clubhouse. That's kind of a pretty collaborative tool as well. Increase in trust. Karthik, I'd really like to hear some elaboration there. Increase in trust, like you're seeing the future of work being a more trusting place, because I'm seeing a lot of the other side of it, that it's difficult for us to trust a lot of news because so much fake news is out there and things like that. So maybe you're thinking of a different context. If you could elaborate a little. I don't know if people can unmute, or if not, then you can just elaborate by adding Karthik in the text chat itself. But I'm picking up some key points. The remote work has come, one key point that is coming up. What's happened? My system has suddenly stopped sharing. Can you guys see my screen? Sharing is paused for some reason. Bring your shared window to the front. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay. So, so what I thought is I would pick out some key points about the future of work. Because you've brought up two key ones that I'm picking up. One is around the whole remote working environment, and another is around the flexibility offered to employees, or you as a employee, as somebody who's working, to operate in a more flexible environment, because you can work across time zones and things like that. So I'm going to look at two different aspects, and frankly there are many more, but we'll focus on two. But the idea here is just to walk through these two to give you a guidance of something you can use in future when you're analyzing this yourself and with small teams. So one is digitization, and the second one is around looking at the changing nature of the way talent operates. And this is around, like, for example, the point that you're making, that as talent, each of you is talent, you operate in a different way because now you're more flexible in terms of your time zones. You can approach different countries more easily without traveling, because that's what a lot of that remote is enabling. Okay, so what I'd like to do is now look at the implications of each of these two aspects, and these are just two of many in the future of work, but we'll analyze these two and then use that as a model to analyze others in the future. So let's look at digitization. I'll walk you through that one, and then I'll seek your help to help me with the looking at the points for the changing nature of talent, because all of you are talent and you'll be able to come up with some key points. So let's look at digitization to start with. Okay, what are the implications of digitization as a key aspect of the future of work? I mean, in a way, the future of work is now. We are very heavily digitized already, but it's going to get even more powerful as we go along. So first, just in terms of the definition, digitization is really looking at data in the form of text, sound, and audio, just so that we have a common understanding of what is digitization. And what the future of work is really enabling by having data in the form of text, sound, and audio. It's easier to turn data into information. Okay, because we now have access to all this data, translating it into information is easier through especially things like analytics and AI. Artificial intelligence can help us really make that translation happen. It also makes it easier to share remotely. So because data is digitized, it's easier to share it in a remote environment. Okay, so those are some implications of digitization. Digitization also helps us to automate more effectively, because when we see reams of data that are similar, we can cluster them together and we can get automated systems to run certain algorithms, or to run certain even tasks that otherwise an individual would have to do. So automation becomes easier, and that seems to be one aspect that digitization engenders. Data is more mobile now. So yes, it's possible to share remotely. Maybe it's a similar point, but it's also the fact that it's available to us on a mobile phone as well. So it's easy to transport, and it's something that is available at one's fingertips. There's the equity of a common platform. So another aspect about digitization is that it's almost like a political statement that here I am, I'm on this panel or on this, here I'm speaking with you, and we're all equals in a community of sharing with one another. And it creates an equality of this platform. You know, if we had the speaking ability, then you could unmute yourself and you could speak, and your voice would be as powerful as the next person's voice. So this whole remote operating also gives each of us a platform to speak up and be on an equal platform. It creates those opportunities for people that otherwise might have been denied entry to certain rooms, to certain meetings, to certain something. Now they have access to that. And so we are all on the same Zoom call, for example, right? There's also an expectation of speed and choice. So this is from a customer point of view. Digitization has enhanced our expectation in terms of speed and choice of what we receive. There's the expectation of multimedia, and that's the fact that text, sound, and video. And so even when we think about learning, we want to see learning in multifaceted ways. There are additionally issues of privacy and security. So I've shared a list here, but this is really like almost like a laundry list of different ideas. They're not all connected, but they're connected with digitization, but there are many different implications of digitization. And these are just some of them. And so it's worthwhile when you think about the future of work, when you look at that, ball, what's it called? The ball which you look through, I've forgotten the name of it. I don't know, name has slipped my mind. But when you think about it, then you can imagine these different aspects about digitization. So let's look at the crystal ball. That was it, Jason. Thank you for that. Let's now look at this, do the same exercise with this other topic of the changing nature of talent. And here I'd like to invite you to tell me what are some of the bullet points that should go underneath when we talk about the changing nature of talent when we look at the future of work. So I invite each of you to now look into a crystal ball and to say, talent is changing in this new world. You've already talked about flexibility. What else can you share? Continuous learning. Yes. Okay. Great, Karthik. Good start. What else on nature of talent? What are some things that come to mind? And I'll share some diagrams just to kind of help with moving it along. Yeah. Collaborative, more collaborative approach. Adaptability. So you're saying talent is going to be more adaptable, needs to be more adaptable. Okay. Suman, thank you for that. What else? Building talent muscle. That, okay, you're looking at that diagram, but the fact of needing to skill, needing to continuously skill yourself, absolutely. And also the idea of multiple skill sets, absolutely valid point. Like earlier, we could specialize in one key area, and you can see that here, the T-shaped skill, right? T-shaped is you have a broad set of skills and then one area of specialization. But today, we can no longer focus on that. From T-shaped, we moved first to pie-shaped, where you had two areas of specialization and a broad set of generalized skills. But now even pie-shaped is not sufficient, because who knows, in the future of work, we don't know what skills are going to become obsolete. Your specialization, one or two, could become obsolete. You need to have multiple specialization. It's hard, but that's what we need. You need different ways to deliver value. Okay, so I'm going to put down some points, and many of them I think you're already bringing up here. So one point about the changing nature of talent is gig workers. And the gig economy is this whole idea of people operating in a more freelance mode, rather than this idea of general full-time employment. It's much more you carry your skills with you and you give them to the highest bidder, and you're able to operate in that way. And we see more and more people opting for that model if they have the opportunity to do that. Skills is the new currency, the T-shaped, pie-shaped, comb-shaped skills, which we just talked about. Other areas to think about is employment versus employability as one key change that is happening. I'm seeing E-shaped skills. I hadn't heard that. So T-shaped, pie-shaped, and we call it comb-shaped actually, not E-shaped, because the E is, it's like upside lying down. So it's comb-shaped. So it's like a comb with rather big gaps between the comb. Opportunity for those members who are less talkative to share information. So yes, this gives this whole nature of talent it's enabling people to share in different ways. So somebody who's more auditory inclined can share verbally, somebody else can share visually. There are different ways in which people, and we are more receptive to these multiple ways as well. It also, when we think about the nature of talent, attract, develop, and retain models change in line with that. Because if you're trying to attract talent and you're looking for people to stay loyal to your company for a long period of time, it's a different kind of talent than if you are thinking, okay, I want this best talent, but for a short period, I'm ready to think about this person moving somewhere else. But as long as I get his or her skills for this period of time, it's, our models of how we hire, how we retain, how we develop people change in line with that. Maybe less loyalty, absolutely, Subramanya. And maybe a bigger drive for innovation because we want that immediacy of the innovation. There's also, in the changing nature of talent, that individual aspirations, organizational aspirations, and the aspirations of, what are our goals for the planet, they also have an impact. People now more and more, one key goal of a lot of our young talent today is about sustainability, thinking about more doing work that has a sustainable aspect to it, that they don't want to work with organizations that are against the environment or not supportive in that way. Flexibility, we've already talked about. You guys have also raised that point. Personal and professional aspect as well, that, your personal as well as your professional aspect, and awareness of bias is something new that's come up recently with the whole Me Too movement and things like that, that we are more conscious of the environment in which we are learning and the fact that more women are more empowered in the new world. So we've looked at the future of work in terms of digitization and in terms of the nature of talent. And you can take different aspects of the future of work and then analyze it in this way. And I would really recommend that you do that, because it's a way to really think about the future of work, because, all of us can be futurists. Nobody really knows what the future holds. But if we can get into the habit of starting to do this analysis and discussions with others, and ideally with a diverse group, because then you'll get more ideas, it's a useful way to really get some insight. So combining that learning and the future of work, I wanted to share a few quotes that you could reflect on when you think about both these together. Okay. One is just the idea of reflection itself. What is reflection? This is a quote that I got saying, reflection is looking back so that the view looking forward is more clear. So the advice is to really think about, when do we take time to reflect on what's happening around us? Because we're in the middle of major changes taking place. And sometimes we get so busy running to just stay in the same place that we don't stop to say, what's really happening? And when we do that, it helps us. When we see what are the changes that have recently taken place, what has been happening, it helps us then look forward a little with greater clarity. So that's one invitation to all of you here. Second one is about thinking about diversity. And I think somebody here has raised the point, Karthik, about diversity and inclusion, because diversity really helps us also to understand difference. And there's always strength in that. So there's the beauty of the uniqueness of each individual, but there's also the strength of having difference and that diversity. Okay, so that's something else to consider. A definition here of luck. Many times when we look at other people's careers, we say, she was really lucky. She got a lucky break. The reality is that all of us have opportunities thrown to us left, right, and center. but only a few of us have done the preparation to enable us to grab the opportunity. And in retrospect, when you look at it, the person looks like, hey, they got lucky. But the reality is that there is, of course, some luck involved in all career development. But the reality is that if I'm prepared, then when the opportunity comes knocking on the door, I'm able to grab that opportunity. And then that looks like a lucky break. But we all have those opportunities, and sometimes we don't have the prep done behind to grab it. And then the last quote is about, you only have control over 3 things in your life: the thoughts you think, the images you visualize, and the actions you take. So this is, again, kind of a reflection point, that what are you thinking about? What are you visualizing for the future? And what are the actions you're taking to get into that direction? So in combining learning and the future of work, I want to summarize with some key actions to invite you to do. And the first action is around really thinking about outside in and inside out in terms of your mindset. So think about the fact that you need to be looking at ways in which you're looking outside in. So your sense-making ability of what do you see out there? It's kind of like, imagine you have antenna on your head, and how do you make sure you hone that sense-making ability? Having a diverse group of friends and colleagues to discuss what's happening would be one way, and there are various other ways, but that would be one key focus for you to consider, okay? But I'm not getting my... the second one is identify the priorities that are relevant to you. So that's the inside out portion, that think about what's a priority for you. Do that reflection, take that time for reflection to see those priorities so that you're also thinking about that and then bringing that out into the world. And the second point is about build resilience into learning talent interventions. And the way you build that resilience is really ensuring, one, that you have a checklist approach. So, the checklist that I shared with you about learning design, use that checklist. The next time you're planning an intervention, go through that checklist and just say, okay, what are the things I'm incorporating into my learning? And another is really thinking about the best, beginning with the end in mind. And that's really thinking about what is the outcome you want before you start initiating any action. So with that, I'm going to pause and stop for Q&A. Any questions from the team? Over to you, Aarti.
Yes, Anita, there is a question which is in the Q&A box, and that is, I think Karthik asked that, and he asked how or what do you measure the impact of trainings has created post-training? So it's more like once you train somebody, how do you follow up, or how do you measure that?
Okay, so that's a really good $1 million question. There's a famous guy called Kirkpatrick who's done a lot of work in that. And the Kirkpatrick model is still seen as one of the best models for looking at training. And it essentially has 4 levels. I mean, other people have made it more advanced and, all that. But essentially the 4 levels are, the first level is the immediate impact of the learning interventions. So I call that level, like level 1, it's like the smiley face that you get at the end of a workshop, like when you send in the feedback form and did you like the program? Yes, smiley face, that's, so that's the first level. The second level is what was your learning gain, from when where were you before and where did you get to from there? The third level is what can you apply? What is your what can you apply? What behavior change? I mean, and getting to third level is really, it means going back to the person maybe 3 or 4 months later and saying, what behavior has changed? I tried to change this behavior. Maybe I was trying to build presentation skills. Has this person's presentation skills improved, and finding some ways to measure that? It's a little harder to do because you don't always know that that it's only your learning that has made the difference, because the person might have done a bunch of other things to help their presentation skills. But nevertheless, that would be the third level. And the fourth level is sort of the panacea of trying to get learning measurement, which is, the ROI, the return on investment in the learning. Like you invested X amount, what was the return on that? Much harder to do, more theoretical than practical. But it's really trying to work on each of these in different ways, where you start to get some feedback on whether you're having an impact. So I would say just look at the Kirkpatrick model, see what parts you can actually measure for the interventions, and start with that.
Thanks for that, Anita. And Jason also has another question where he would like you to kind of expand a little more on the comb-shaped people a little more. Are all the teeth related?
They're actually not necessarily related, but practically speaking, I suppose one wants them to be slightly related, because it's kind of hard to have a specialization in multiple completely different areas, So the comb-shaped is not really comb-shaped people as such, but it's the idea of when you're thinking about building your skills, to think about skill building not only as, to think that I need to have a broad spectrum of knowledge, and I need to have specializations in certain areas. And so the idea there is for you, ideally your specialization areas are areas that you are interested in. And each of us is multifaceted people. So it's not like I have an interest, if I'm doing physics, I'm only interested in all these different physics elements, or, I might also be enjoying something artistic, or I might also like biology, or so it might be that I'm specializing in areas that are quite disparate, or I might be specializing in one area but related areas, because today every area has so many multiple specializations. So I don't think it's like a directive that you should only do it this way or that way. I think the idea though is that we need to hedge our bets in a way, because we don't know what the future is, and we don't know which skills that today seem all important suddenly might become obsolete tomorrow. So hedge your bets by ensuring that you are constantly learning and building your capability in multiple fields. And be choosy about them, because there's only so many hours in a day, but try and make sure that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, essentially. And Suman, yes, finding a right mentor could be a good way of building that learning as well. Building one's skills.